Hey there guys, in this video we're going to take a look at our Edmentum lesson in our algebra unit, looking at solving quadratic equations by factoring. So just a friendly reminder, when we're looking at a quadratic, the basic format is going to be ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. They could kind of shuffle some things around in the problem, but basically a good way to know if you have a quadratic is if the largest exponent is 2, okay? And then a friendly reminder that factors are two binomials or two-term expressions that are set in parentheses and being multiplied, set equal to 0. And then our answers or our solutions to the quadratic equations are going to be in the form of x is equal to number. Now with quadratics, because it's to the second power, and remember we're looking at a parabola, so we're looking for where that parabola touches the x-axis. We have a possibility for having two answers, depending on how our parabola is drawn. We could also have the possibility of only having one answer, or we could have the possibility of having no answers. So basically your parabola does not touch, and it could be, these parabolas could be anywhere in the coordinate plane. It doesn't have to just be, facing up. It could also face down and do all kinds of different things. But those are the possibilities that we have for answers. Most of the time, if they give us a quadratic equation and they ask us to solve, we're going to have to factor in order to be able to get our answers. So to start us off kind of in the middle with factors, we are going to start with the problems that give us factors and ask us to come up with the answers or solutions. In this particular lesson, they like to use the word solution a lot for answers. So if they ask you to get to solutions, this is how we're going to get there. Okay, so taking a look, it says find the solutions for x in the equation below. And if you look at this chart that I've given you, these are factors because they are in the form of two things being multiplied. See those two binomials, bi meaning like bicycle, two. We've got those two terms being multiplied together. So to get from these factors to solutions, you're going to take each of these factors and set them equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to go x plus 4 is equal to 0. Subtract the 4 from both sides, and then x is going to be equal to negative 4. And like I said, there's always that possibility for 2, and that's where the second binomial comes in. You're going to take this guy, set it equal to 0. X minus 12 is equal to 0. Add 12 to both sides, and end up with x is equal to positive 12. So our parabola is going to touch the x-axis at x is equal to negative 4 and x is equal to 12. And that's what it's asking for when it's looking for those solutions. Where does that parabola touch the x-axis? So looking at another type of problem that they could give you, kind of the same idea, the numbers are just a little different. Solve the following quadratic equation. Again, they give us factors. And whenever they give these problems to you in your mastery test, they're not necessarily going to be, in the order that I'm giving you now. So just be ready for them to be mixed up. So it still says solve the following quadratic equation. So see how they're kind of using different ways of asking, but we're wanting the same thing. We want to solve or find these solutions. So we're going to take these and set them equal to 0 and solve. So 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. It's a regular algebra problem we're going to solve. So subtract the 3 both sides. 4x is equal to negative 3. Divide both sides by 4. And x is equal to negative 3/4. And I've got my x minus 6 is equal to 0. So x minus 6 equal to 0. Add the 6 to both sides. And then x is equal to 6. So our answer for this one is going to be x is equal to negative 3/4 and x is equal to 6. They could also give these types of problems to you in a slightly different way. They've got one, at least in the practice, where they asked you to drag each solution to the correct location in the table. Each solution can be used more than once, but not all solutions will necessarily be used. And so what I do with these is I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what they have written down here in the bottom. I just focus on what they give me to solve. So these are going to solve the same exact way that I was talking to you above. I'll work out this one with you. So if you notice that this one right here has the same exact binomials being multiplied twice. So if we take that guy and we do the 3x plus 8 is equal to 0 and solve by subtracting 8, 3x is equal to negative 8 divided by 3, x is equal to negative 8 thirds. Now if you do the same thing for this one, you get the same exact answer. But if you get this type of question on a mastery test, or if you get this type of question whenever you're doing your practice problems before you take your mastery test, whenever you drag that negative 8 thirds up, only drag that up once. And this is one of those examples that I was talking about with you where the parabola is only going to touch the x-axis once. And that's why there's only one. It's considered a double solution because you come up with the same answer twice. All right, so and then these two are going to kind of be the same ideas, either what we did above or what I just talked to you about here. This one looks a little bit different though, so I wanted to make sure I talked about it. So looking at this one, we've got x times the quantity 3x minus 8. And so the only thing that's really different from all the other ones that we've done is we've got x all by itself. That x still needs to be set equal to 0. When we take both of those terms and set them equal to 0 and solve, same thing here. X is equal to 0. 3x minus 8 is equal to 0. We take them both, set them equal to 0, and solve. These are really nice because that one's done. There's no math that you need to do other than to remember and make sure that you don't forget to take that x and set it equal to 0. So to finish this one, 3x is equal to 8, or x is equal to 8 thirds. So you would want to drag both x is equal to 0 and x is equal to 8 thirds into that box. All right, another type of problem that they could give you is one that looks like this. So with this one, we've got a model rocket being launched from the top of a building. Its height can be modeled by the quadratic equation given there, where h is the rocket's height in meters after t seconds. When factored, the equation is this. What is a reasonable time for it to take the rocket to land on the ground? So don't let problems like this get you worried. This one is actually a super nice problem. They've already factored it for you. Yeah, you can look at that and go, oh. And I don't blame you because I would do the same thing if I were given this to factor. But they've already done the factoring for you. So all you need to do is what is the reasonable time? In this problem, they do time is in t seconds, so that tells us that we have to solve for t. So that means all we need to do is take those terms that are being multiplied and set them equal to 0 and solve. So if I follow the rules, exactly as they're written, technically we're supposed to do negative 4.9 is equal to 0, and that's not true, and it's not a true statement. So mathematicians kind of ignore that happens. T minus 13 is equal to 0, and t plus 2 is equal to 0. So now with these, don't get excited and get in a super hurry that you got one of these problems, because people tend to make mistakes when they do that. Take the time, think about it, write it down, and that way you don't make mistakes. So we've got an option of t can be equal to 13. We solve for t over here. T can be equal to negative 2. But think about what t means. T represents time. You cannot have negative time. Like the rocket can't land on the ground after taking off before it gets set off. So you can't have negative time whenever it comes to experiments. So for this one, t is going to be equal to 13 seconds. So be careful with those. If they give you a word problem and they ask you how long does it take given this factored form, take the time, write them down, set them equal to 0 and solve, and make sure you go with the positive time. All right, so the second type of problem that they could give you to solve is a quadratic that has two terms, and they want you to factor it and then move it to answers or solutions. So this is me referring to, let me see if it'll let me go there without giving me too much trouble. There we go. This is me referring to this table right here. We start with the equation. They want us to move it to factors, and they want us to get solutions. So basically, they say, here's your quadratic equation, and I want you to tell me what the answers are. And you've got to remember that we have to go to factors in the meantime. So to start us off nicely with these, we're going to start off with the ones that give us two terms. So the steps that I have for you to do those, very first thing, make sure that they're set equal to 0 when we're working with these quadratic equations. The rules that we have only work if we've got everything set equal to 0. The second thing you're going to do is to find the greatest common factor. Find the biggest number that divides all of the numbers evenly, and it's number and variable. We've got to keep variables in mind. And then to factor, we're going to take those two terms, set each of them equal to 0, and solve. So looking at this first one that they give us, they tell us to solve the following equation for x. So the very first thing that I want to do here is check and see, is this set equal to 0? And looking at this one, it is, because it's set equal to 0. There's nothing on that right side of the equation. So next I want to think about greatest common factor. Well, if I'm looking at 12 and 24, I want to think of a list of things that multiplies together to make 12 and 24. So we can do 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, and then we kind of loop back around, and then we'll be there again. And then think of my list of 24. 1 times 24 makes 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, 5 doesn't work, and then we loop back around to 6, so we know we've got our list. So we want to look between these two lists that we have, what is the biggest number that multiplies to make both of those numbers? So if we look at those lists, the biggest number between the two of them that they both have in common, or the greatest common factor, is going to be 12. So if I look, I can divide the whole thing by 12. So that's the greatest common number between the two, the greatest common factor that's a number. Now I need to think about my variables. So if I'm looking at my x squared, it's made up of x times x. And if I look at just my x, it's made up of an x. So between those two, they both have an x in common. So my greatest common factor for those terms is going to be x. So now I'm going to divide out my greatest common factor. So if I do that, I'm going to do 12 divided by 12 is going to be 1. X squared divided by x is going to be x. It's going to stay plus in between. 24 divided by 12 is going to be 2. And then x divided by x is going to be 1. So I'm going to leave it just like that. And I put my greatest common factor out in front. So I've got 12x is equal to 0. So I've taken this quadratic equation that they've given us, and I've moved it so that we've got them written as factors. So now all I need to do to finish solving is to take those factors, set them equal to 0, and solve. So if I do that, I've got, don't forget this part, 12x is equal to 0, divide both sides by 12, and then x, if you put that in your calculator, x is going to be equal to 0. I do the same thing for this guy. X, or 1x plus 2, is equal to 0, minus 2 from both sides, and then x is going to be equal to a negative 2. So I've got x is equal to negative 2, and x is equal to 0 for that one. So that's how you take those, a binomial, and do the greatest common factor and then factor. Let's try one more together before we move on to the next type. So looking at this one, solve the following quadratic equation. Again, they're expecting you to remember the steps that I had up there for you. If you need to, before you take that mastery test or before you do those practice problems, make sure you write these steps down. You can pause the video and write these steps down so you've got them. So whenever you take do the practice, you can look back to them to use. Okay. So looking at solving the following quadratic equations, very first thing I want to do following those steps, make sure that it is equal to 0, and it is. The second thing that I want to do is to find the greatest common factor between the two of those. So if I'm looking at 24 and 32, let's make our list. So 24, 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. And then if I do the same thing for 32, 1 times 32, and then 32, let's see if 2 works. 32 divided by 2 gives us 16, so 2 times 16. 32, does 3 work? 32 divided by 3, nope. If you put that in a calculator, you end up with a decimal, so that's not going to work. 32 divided by 4 is going to give us 8, so 4 times 8. 5 isn't going to work. 32 divided by 6 is going to give, does not, hold on, sorry. 32 divided by 6 does not work. It's going to give us a decimal. 32 divided by 7 also does not work. 32 divided by 8 will give us 4. So we've looped back around, so that's how we know we've got all our possible factors there. So looking between the two, what is the biggest number that is common in both lists? So like we've got the 1, we've got the 2, but we're looking for the biggest. And the biggest they both have in common is going to be 8. So the greatest common factor for the numbers is going to be 8. So I'm going to divide by 8. But to check the variables, I've got, just like above, I've got an x squared and an x. To make an x squared, I have to do x times x. And then with x, you're just going to have x. So both of these have an x in common. So 8x is going to be my greatest common factor here. So then I'm going to do 24 divided by 8 is going to give us 3. And then x squared divided by x is going to be x. This has a plus here, so this is going to be a plus there. 32 divided by 8 is going to be 4. X divided by x is going to be 1. So it's just going to be 4 times 1, which is 4. And don't forget to put your 8x out in front. So we've taken our quadratic equation. We've got it written as factors. So now we just need to take those factors, set them both equal to 0, and solve. So 8x equal to 0. Divide both sides by 8. X is going to be equal to 0, and then 3x plus 4 is equal to 0. Subtract 4 from both sides, and we're going to end up with 3x is equal to negative 4. Divide both sides by 3. X is equal to negative 4/3. So our answer for this one is going to be x is equal to 0, and x is equal to negative 4/3. So that's what happens whenever you've got two terms. Well, we're going to take a look at what happens whenever we've got a quadratic with 3 terms that they want the solutions for. So how to go from having the quadratic to taking it to factors to taking it to solutions. And here's the steps that I have for this. So when we're looking at 3 terms and we've got our quadratic, we're looking for a number that multiplies, so 2 numbers that multiply to make your third term, and it's got to be in this order. So everything's got to be set equal to 0. The term with the x squared has to come first. The term with just the x has to come second, and the term with just the c has to come third. So we're looking for a number that multiplies, 2 numbers that multiply to make c, and those same 2 numbers have to add to give us the b value. So for the steps, we're going to set up our factors. We're going to do the quantity of x times the quantity of x, because we know that's what's going to happen. Following the steps that I gave you at the very, very beginning, this is what factors look like. And it's going to be set equal to 0. And the next thing that I like to do is to figure out the signs. So if you look at your c term, if your c term is positive, you are either going to have a positive times a positive, right there, or a negative times a negative. It just depends on what happens with your b term. If your b term is minus, it's going to be a negative times a negative. If your b term is a positive, it's going to be a positive times a positive. But what happens if your c value is negative? If your c value is negative, it's going to be a mixture of one of those 2 things. It's going to be a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive. And the way that you figure out is if you look at your b value, if your b is positive, the big factor, the big number from the factor is going to be positive, and if your b number is negative, then the big number from your factors is going to be 0. Third, you're going to list the numbers that multiply to make c, just the c values, kind of like we were doing above whenever we were looking for our greatest common factors. The fourth thing we're going to want to do is put our signs in, like we figured out here. And then 5, find the combination from our c's and the signs that add up to make our b value. And then set each of the factors, or the parentheses, set equal to 0 and solve. So this is like what we were doing in the first couple examples. All right, so if we try this out, they want us to solve the following equation for x. So very first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to check and make sure everything is set equal to 0. The second thing that I'm going to do, and I'm using these steps from above. I don't think they're written here, so I think I'm going to write them. Yeah. The very first thing you do, first, check for a GCF. See if you have a greatest common factor. Make sure it's equal to 0. Check and see if it's got a greatest common factor. It will save you a lot of work and frustration in the long run if you check and see if you've got a greatest common factor, and then go to here. Okay? So first thing they want us to do is they want us to solve that equation for x. So yes, it is set equal to 0. No, it does not have a greatest common factor. So what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to do step 1, which is to set up my parentheses. So it's going to be an x, and an x, and the set is equal to 0. So the next thing I like to do is to figure out my signs. So if I look at my signs, I'm going to check out the sign for my c value. This is my a value, this is my b value, and this is my c value. So looking at this, a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 11, and c is equal to negative 60. So my c value is negative. So that means I'm either looking at a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive. So if I look at my b value is negative. So my big number is going to be negative. And whenever I do, it doesn't matter which way you do these, but whenever I do these, my big number is always over on this side. So I'm going to set it up like this. So that's my step 2. Figure out what your signs are going to be. My step 3 is going to be to make a list of things that multiply together to make 60. It's a pretty big list. 60 is a very busy number. So 1 times 60, 60. 2 times 30, 3 times 20, 4 times 15, I believe, but I want to make sure I get it right for you. Yeah, 4 times 15, 5 times 12, 6 times 10, 7 doesn't work, 8 doesn't work, 9 doesn't work, and then we loop back to 10, so we know we've got the whole thing. So I know that from this step right here, so step 4 is to put the signs in. I know from this step right here that it's going to be, the bigger number is going to be negative. So I'm checking to see the combination that adds up to be b. So I'm kind of doing step 4 and step 5 together. So I know my big number is going to be negative. So negative, 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 negative. So which of these is going to add up to give us a negative 11? So you can go through and actually do the math. So 1 plus negative 60 is going to give us a negative 59. And then 2 plus negative 30 is going to give us a negative 28. 3 plus a negative 20 is going to give us a negative 17. 4 plus a negative 15 is going to give us a negative 11. Ooh, that's what we were looking for. So you can, if you're not sure, you can just go through and do the whole list, or you can kind of just see which one you think it's going to be and then do the math real quick to see. Okay, so this is going to be our answer right here. So we've got a positive 4 times a negative 15 is going to, and I'm double checking. So positive 4 times a negative 15 does give us a negative 60. And then to check the middle term, I've got positive 4x times a negative 15x. And if I add that together, that's going to give us a negative 11x that we were looking for. So that's the right combination. So they want us to solve. So I'm going to take each of those that they have for us that we found and set them equal to 0. So x plus 4 is equal to 0, and x minus 15 is equal to 0. So to solve, subtract the 4 both sides. X is equal to negative 4. Add the 15 both sides. X is equal to 15. So that's our answer. X is equal to a -4 and X is equal to 15. So to solve the following equation, those are the steps that you need to do. And that's our answer. All right, so they're not always going to be quite that busy. It could be a little more busy, but they're not going to be always quite that big. So looking at the next one they give us to solve, they want us to factor that quadratic equation to reveal the solution. So see how they're changing the way they're asking you to do the same exact thing. So this is a factor to reveal solutions. They want, when you see solutions, I hope you're thinking like X is equal to number is the answer that they are looking for. Factor, that's them giving you the hint that you need to have those two things multiplied together in parentheses to get us there. So we got to go through the steps. Very first thing to ask ourselves, is this set equal to 0? And it is not. We've got kind of like an ax squared plus bx plus c. This is not equal to 0. So this is not the form of the equation that we want to be working with to solve. So to do that, I'm going to add the 9 to both sides. And that's going to leave us with x squared plus 4x, and then -21 plus 9 is going to give us minus 12 is equal to 0. So, okay, we're good. Now it's set equal to 0. Second thing to check for, is there a greatest common factor? If we're looking and we have a greatest common factor, that number will be in front of the x squared, and it's got to divide all of the terms. I know 4 will divide both the middle term and the last term, but it will not divide the first term evenly. So there's not a greatest common factor for this one. So then to set up my parentheses, step 1, set up those parentheses. So I've got my factors, set equal to 0. This is going to be an x. This is going to be an x. Next, to think about my signs, that what my signs are going to be, this is a minus. So that means I'm going to have a positive times a negative. And looking at my b term, looking at that sign right there, my bigger term is going to be positive. So there we go. So if I make our list of things that multiply together to make 12, 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. And that's our whole list. That's a lot better than, remember when I was saying sometimes they're not going to be quite as busy. This is one example where it's not quite as busy. So then if I put my signs in that we figured out over here, I know my bigger number is going to be positive. So positive, this one's negative, that one's negative, that one's negative. Okay, so I'm looking for things that add to be a positive 4. So -1 plus 12 is going to give us a positive 11. -2 plus 6 is going to give us our positive 4. So there's our combination. -2 plus 6. Okay, so whenever I do these, I always like to double check and make sure I pick the right number. So I've got a -2 times x will give me a -2x. And then x times a positive 6 will give me a positive 6x. 2x plus 6x will give us a positive 4x. So we have picked the right two numbers for our combination. And I've got a -2 plus 6 that gives us a -12. So all we have left to do is to take our two binomials, our two factors, and set them equal to 0 and solve. So x minus 2 is equal to 0. X plus 6 is equal to 0. So add the two. X is going to be equal to positive 2, subtract 6. X is going to be equal to -6. So x is equal to 2 and x is equal to -6 for that problem. All right, so word type problems that they could give you, word problems that they could give you. A race car passes the first checkpoint at a constant speed of 20 meters per second. There's our meters per second. And immediately begins accelerating at a rate of 10 meters per second squared. There's our 10 meters per second squared. How long will the car take to reach the finish line 480 meters beyond the checkpoint? And it can be represented using the following equation. So unlike that first word problem that they gave us, where they did give us our factors, this one does not give us our factors. So we've got to do all the factoring on our own. So we're still following those steps. For the very first thing, I want to check and make sure, is everything set equal to 0 and simplified? It is not. I've got this 1/2 times 10 that I can do. And I'm only multiplying it to the 10 and not the 20 or anything else because the whole thing is not in parentheses. Like they would have done that if they wanted the whole thing to be multiplied by the 1/2, but they didn't. They just did 1/2 times 10. So if I simplify, 1/2 times 10 will give us 5x squared plus 20t. And then we've got that 480 over on this side of the equal sign. It's got to be set equal to 0. So math-wise, to move it, I need to subtract. It's a positive 480, so to move it, I need to subtract 480 both sides. So I've got 5x squared plus 20t minus 480 set equal to 0. So we've got everything set equal to 0. Everything is simplified. The next thing that I want to double check for is to see if there is a greatest common factor. For these, if there's going to be the greatest common factor, it's usually going to be that guy. There are problems that you can do where you do have a number in front of that x squared, and you'll do those in algebra too, but I'm not going to make us do them now. There will be a greatest common factor. So that 5 will divide out of all 3 of those terms evenly. And if we do that, that's going to leave us with, sorry, these are t's. So if I divide out a 5, that's going to leave us with 5 on the outside times t squared plus 4t minus 96 is equal to 0. And so now, 0. So now all we need to do is to factor what's left inside of the parentheses here. So if I'm looking at 96 and I make our list for things that multiply together to make a 96, 1 times 96. We're looking to add to make it 4. Sorry, I'm skipping some steps on here. So I'm going to set up my parentheses. I've got t times, and then looking here at my c value, I'm going to have a positive times a negative because that's a negative. And the only way you can make a negative by multiplying is doing a positive times a negative. And the bigger number is going to be positive. So the bigger number is going to be positive. So I'm going to do plus there, and minus there, and I'm going to make my list. So then 96 divided by 2 is 48. So 2 times 48. 96 divided by 3. 3 times 32. 96 divided by 4. 4 times 24. 96, 5 won't work. Divided by 6 is going to be 16. So 6 times 16. And 96 divided by 7. That doesn't work. 96 divided by 8. So 8 times 12. 96 divided by 9. 10's not going to work. 9 didn't work. 96 divided by 12. And that loops us back around to 8. So that's our whole entire list that we have right there. So our big number is going to be positive. That means the small numbers are going to be negative. So which of these is going to add up to give us a positive 14? Negative 8 plus 12. So to double check, here's my negative 8t. 10 times plus 12 plus 12t. And that does give us our positive 4. So now all I need to do is to take those two terms, set them equal to 0, and solve. So t minus 8 is equal to 0, and then t plus 12 is equal to 0. So if I solve, add the 8 to both sides, subtract the 12 both sides, t is going to be equal to 12, negative 12, and then t is going to be equal to 8. So it wants to know how long the car will take to reach the finish line, 480 meters beyond the checkpoint. So here I've got 8 seconds, and here I have, I know it's hard to see, but this is a negative 12 seconds. And when we're working with time, we cannot have negative time, so that means that the car is going to reach the checkpoint at 8 seconds. Looking at this last type, this was the example that I was talking about, where they could give you some problems where it does have a greatest common factor, but it ends up leaving you with a number in front. So with this one, just to kind of fast forward for you, the greatest common factor would be 4. You would end up dividing 4 out from everything, and then have 4 on the outside times 20x squared plus 23x minus 21 is equal to 0. And this is factorable. The step that it adds to factor this, though, is to multiply, and then you're looking for a list of things that multiply to make negative 420, but add to make a 23. And that kind of takes it a step further than I'm interested in having you guys work these problems right now. So the problems like that you may see on your mastery test. So the mastery test is not in the same order as the mastery test that I see, and you may not have all the problems. But these are the answers to the types of problems that I'm not going to have you doing now. Don't have this open in a tab and then try and click over to this tab while you're working on your master test. I would suggest you have this YouTube video open on something like your phone. People have told me that whenever they click out to another tab, they've had problems with it locking them out. So that's a fix for that. And don't assume that just because for this problem right here, because the answer for me is B, the answer for you is going to be B. I'm pretty sure that they shuffle the answers. So just double check and then make sure you're clicking the right ones, and then you'll be okay. And like I said, you may not get any of these problems, or you may get all these problems. Either way, there's the help for those. If you've got any questions or need any help, I will be having live office hours all week. You can shoot me an email, or if you want to see me and then have me see your screen and be able to help you out that way, I'd be more than happy to. Take care, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.